a lot of people start in security and they go on the attack side. I started always on the defense side. I think that defense is more interesting strategically because the attackers only need to win once. You only need to get one thing right and then you can win as an attacker. Defense, really, you have to get all of the things right within reason, and you have finite resources. And not only that, but it's not clear cut. It's really an art. It's like, okay, what is the most likely scenario that we're going to get compromised? And then we go shore that up. So I like the strategy involved in it. So I've always been really interested in the blue team side for that reason. It's like, okay, there's only so many hours in the day and so many of us. What are we going to go spend our time on to mitigate the most risk as possible?
So we were talking about getting together because I wanted to hear more about kind of what's going on with Resourcely. I think you were on stage at Founders You Should Know. Was it a year ago now? It feels like you were in maybe one of the first.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So, and I guess a lot has changed since then, but I also wanted to kind of, back it up and get more of your story. So like you were, my understanding is a lot of what Resourcely is today came out of a lot of the experience you had at Netflix and Databricks and maybe some of the other experiences in industry. So I wonder if you could sort of just take us through a little bit, like what did that look like, when you were kind of building internal tools, and how did you figure out that these things would graduate to potentially like a market-based tool?
So traditional security is really this kind of like team of no, right? You're in a waterfall model. You're one of these final sign-off steps where you're like, oh, the product's good, or it has too much risk. You need to fix these things. Kind of like a QA type of stage. And first of all, in a continuous delivery model, with SaaS, that checkpoint doesn't really make sense anymore. So security had to kind of retool how they operate. And a lot of security teams traditionally still have that no mentality. And the reason for that is that they feel like they own the risk. So if a company has a breach, by default, the CISO is at fault. They're going to come and say, okay, somebody screwed up, probably the CISO, and then unless it's found to be otherwise. So the security team feels like they own risk. However, we've also shifted towards a DevOps mindset where really developers own a lot of aspects of their application. So instead of having an operations team and a cloud team, developers in many companies are responsible for all of that. So the security team has had to shift. And at Netflix, I think we were a little ahead of the curve because of our culture. It was never acceptable for us to be that security team that said no. Our job was always to run along as quickly as possible with developers and assist them. So the way that we did that is something we called paved roads. It actually came out of DevOps. It wasn't out of security. But the idea is that in this model, the role of a central team is to take their expertise and build really great tools that help developers to understand this new domain. So for example, monitoring and alerting. A developer shouldn't have to implement their own monitoring alerting. They should just drop in something that handles it for them. And then a delivery team, the Netflix team built Spinnaker. This makes it dead simple for a developer to click some buttons, say, I want a cloud app, and then you get all of these best practices that devs don't even need to know about. So like red-black deployments and load balancers and identity-aware proxy and all of these things. So security in 2014 really started their paved road journey with a response to Heartbleed. I don't know if you remember Heartbleed, but it was this kind of like internet melting. Yeah. So in Heartbleed, the deal was your private key material may have been leaked. And Netflix, like many companies, I wasn't there, but they went to go and try and rotate the private keys and the certificates. They quickly realized that they actually couldn't do this because they didn't know who owns the certificates. Like, who are the stakeholders of these things and where are the private keys? And then at the same time, there was all of these other problems happening. So periodically a service would go down. And when you did a RCE and found out like what actually happened, or RCA, root cause analysis, found out what actually happened, it turns out that the certificate expired and a developer hadn't been paying attention to it and didn't rotate it. So the security team saw an opportunity to fix both of those problems at the same time. What they built was this really nice self-service called Lemur. And Lemur takes all of this complexity that developers don't know about and don't need to know about and replaces it with like push a button and tell us what your app is, and we'll get it a certificate. We'll select the cryptographic cipher suite. We'll keep it rotated for you. So for a developer, this is a no-brainer. You're like, I don't want to have to worry about cryptographic cipher suite anyway. Like, here's this really hard, long, convoluted path, and what you're offering me here is like a helicopter ride. And it's like, yeah, okay, I'm not interested in the path here. I want the helicopter ride. So that pattern became really powerful.
Yeah, this is a big change. I think one of the things that really grabs me about this is that I would note that it feels like there's a culture change here versus just a technology change, which is like this, the team saying no to sort of being along for the ride and kind of being more participatory. And I wonder, like, is that something that happened like 5-10 years ago as kind of SaaS software and tooling was coming up everywhere? Or is that something that is kind of more recent?
It's presently happening. It depends on the company. So, Netflix was moving this direction probably 10 years ago. Some companies still haven't moved. So a lot of security, particularly like cloud security, the space that we play, is a very like ticket driven mindset. So you have the security team, they're not a blocker anymore, but they need to go and communicate about risk to developers. So in a DevOps mindset, you meet the developers where they are. And basically what this means is you create a bunch of Jira tickets with vulnerabilities for them to go fix. So the security team is not blocking in a lot of cases. Sometimes they'll say, hey, you have too many Jira tickets or you need to fix this Jira ticket or whatever. But basically, you're creating this flurry of vulnerabilities for developers to go fix. The problem with this is like, if you go back to what I said about Lemur, Lemur is something that the security team offered that made developers' lives easier. These Jira tickets aren't helping anybody. Like you can say, oh, we're giving developers some context about their risk and vulnerabilities or whatever. But the real win is when you make something easier for devs, and Jira tickets don't make anything easier for anybody. So some companies today, they're happy with their dashboards. They're like, okay, I want, a dashboard that shows me all of the risk, and then the dashboard will go and create a bunch of Jira tickets. I think forward-leaning companies, this is probably 5 years ago, this was bleeding edge. Now this is kind of like middle of the pack, in my opinion. But these security teams operate differently in the sense that they integrate directly with developers in their process, and they build these kind of like paved road secure by default systems. And there's a whole bunch of examples of this that aren't resourcely and aren't things that we did at Netflix. For example, in a traditional model, cross-site scripting is like, okay, we're going to do all these scans and we're going to tell you about all the instances of cross-site scripting. But you're always playing whack-a-mole there. Like by the time you file a Jira ticket and it actually gets fixed, there's 10 new Jira tickets. So you're always behind the curve. What a lot of teams have done instead is they just say, we're going to systematically eradicate cross-site scripting by building a nice, easy cross-site scripting proof way of doing what developers need to do. And then in that model, the scanning goes to, instead of detecting cross-site scripting to detecting whether you're using the pattern or not.
Mm-hmm. And are these changes around like how organizations would integrate something like that? Is it hard culturally to get, like, do you need a CISO who sort of already understands this, or does it sometimes come from small developer teams figuring out that they just need to work faster and they kind of figure it out bottoms up, or is it like a combination of the two?
It's a combination of the two. I think when this happens most effectively, because the security team has a lot of resources and time to go and remediate risk. And so for them, if they focus their effort on building great tools that make it really hard for developers to introduce vulnerabilities, then they do less of the ops stuff, less of the Jira and the tracking people down and TPMing people to death. So it's, if you take your investment in tickets and you put it instead to secure by default, then this is the way it works best. I have seen development teams that say, hey, you know what, like we're going to go and integrate this framework for ourselves that has a bunch of properties that we want and also mitigates security vulnerabilities. But this is much easier when some central team adopts it and then makes it available for all of their customers, the developers.
Right. And so with the cloud security model, you have sort of risk being pushed in a different way, right? Like risk, I guess, ultimately lands more on the application developer using the right processes or tools relative to kind of the old way where you had the nose. Is that something that is sort of well understood across the industry right now, or is that something that's like got an evolving norm?
It's evolving for sure. Yeah, I think, at Netflix, they weren't born in the cloud, but they were very early to being in the cloud. So they're considered cloud native. That's not exactly true. But I think when you have, older companies that came from, on-prem data centers and then they're migrating to cloud, or they had a traditional waterfall model and then they're migrating to continuous delivery, it's hard to shift that mindset. I just talked to a really smart person at a company that did that migration yesterday. And yeah, it's definitely a culture switch. But, new companies that are starting today are, when I went to Databricks, that company was born in 2013. So cloud was around when they started. They built it with cloud first mindset. So there was much less culture, hearts and minds winning to be done.
And I guess as an industry, though, there's still people coming from the old way. So if a company gets started today, is it pretty default that they're going to take on these new practices? Like almost every company that gets started today is going to work natively in this way, or are there sort of exceptions maybe based on verticals? I don't know if like maybe healthcare has specific requirements that don't allow it to be as cloud native.
Yeah, so generally the more regulated you are, the more security switches to a blocking mindset. So these regulations get really complex, and you can't expect a developer to know, let's say you have like FedRAMP and PCI and HIPAA, which HIPAA is kind of like theoretical, but you have all of these compliance regimes. You can't even expect a developer to know all of the things that they need to know. So in these, or like banks, for example, banks are literally protecting money. And so it's not acceptable for them to say like, here, developer, here's some risk. Like they need to actually manage risk. That's the job of a security team in a bank. So I think the more regulated or the more extremely high risk, you have zero tolerance for mistakes, then security team is still in a like, hey, we're going to manage risk here very aggressively. We're going to tell you exactly what's safe. And the trade-off there is developers just know they're going to have to move more slowly because somebody's going to need to sign off on what they do.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much of how this industry is changing, but you've been in it I was looking back, it looks like you were even working on security stuff 15 years ago or so. Is that right?
About 12 years.
Or 12 years. Okay. So what sort of like originally drew you to this type of work, or this kind of this sets of tooling to work on?
I have an adversarial mindset, which I think, you could say like is the hacker mindset. So when I was a kid, there'd be some kind of rule and restriction, and a lot of people think like, okay, cool, like I know what to not do. I'm immediately thinking, okay, what are the edges of this? Like you say, I can't do X, but can I do that? Or things like that. So I love security. I was always trying, like my parents at one point put a password on my computer because I'd done something wrong and they didn't want me to use the computer, and I found a way to hack through it and use it anyway. So that kind of adversarial mindset I think is pretty common for security people. A lot of security people get into it by hacking games. So games, you want to have like all of these like anti-cheat provisions. A lot of people will go and figure out how to give their character infinity gold and things like that. So this adversarial mindset's very common. And then through that, I was lucky in the sense that if I was 10 years older when I was graduating school, security wasn't this established profession that I could get into. There was definitely security people, but it wasn't this nice, like, join this, you'll make a bunch of money and tour the world. So I was lucky in the sense that right when I was coming out, security was established as a great profession. I'd be doing this no matter what. I would be doing security. I just love the mindset. I love the idea that there's these rules and systems, but if you're clever about it, you can get around the rules. A lot of people start in security and they go on the attack side. I started always on the defense side. I think that defense is more interesting strategically because the attackers only need to win once. You only need to get one thing right, and then you can win as an attacker. Defense, really, you have to get all of the things right within reason, and you have finite resources. Yep. And not only that, but it's not clear cut. It's really an art. It's like, okay, what is the most likely scenario that we're going to get compromised? And then we go shore that up. So I like the strategy involved in it. So I've always been really interested in the blue team side for that reason. It's like, okay, there's only so many hours in the day and so many of us. What are we going to go spend our time on to mitigate the most risk as possible?
Right. And is the attack versus defense side? Are they both kind of, are there, I guess, what you call white hat versions of each, or does attack usually mean you're kind of in a black hat or gray zone?
Yeah. There's definitely white hat versions of both. So the legal upstanding version of the attack side is penetration testing. So there's all of these, penetration testing is often required by compliance. You need to go and periodically test your systems. So there's pen tests. There's companies that do that. It's a service. A lot of people get started in security and they do like consultant work for one of the pen test shops. And that's actually like a really good way for people to get started because you learn all of the ways that systems are weak, which makes you better on the blue team. And then of course there's the dark side of this where you're actually, you're organized crime and you're going and attacking companies and trying to make money out of it. There's not the dark side of blue team. There's no illegal defense.
Right. So do you have other like hacks that you're playing with on a given day outside of your main job? Like, are there puzzles that you are liking to solve, or, are you still playing video games and trying to sort of exploit them, or sort of what does this manifest in the rest of your life?
Something, I wish I could say yes, but something happened. So when I was early in my career, I'd look at a hack and I'd say, this is the coolest thing in the world. It's magic that this happens. And I'd want to learn about all of the attacks possible. And then, I don't know, somewhere like 5-6 years in, it just became boring to me. Like I guess I became, you often hear security people talk about being jaded, but if you, after a while, you've seen the same pattern play out so many times and you're like, okay, I get it. Like software sucks. Like there's always a way in, it's always broken in some way. So the kind of like attack side became relatively boring to me. So I don't actually like go and attack stuff now. What that got replaced with for me is this love for the business side of security. So there's the technical work and the patterns, tend to be the same. Like, AI is hot now and there's attacks in AI, but those attacks are basically a refresh on the same kind of attacks we've had. Like basically the systems don't do a good job of distinguishing the control plane. Like what are the instructions we should be executing from the data plane? And so if you look at like AI, LLM prompt injection, an attacker gives instructions that the LLM is going to go and execute maliciously. That's basically the exact same pattern as cross-site scripting. It's just applied to a different problem. So I think that part becomes repetitive, but the business side is fascinating. So what you trade off for the like technical meaty attack stuff, you get in the, okay, I'm leading security at whatever, Pepsi. I have not infinity budget. I have $100 million. Like what is the most effective way to spend that money given our specific risk profile, the people that are coming and attacking us, like what they're trying to get? How do we spend the money? Do we hire, more engineers? Do we hire stronger engineers that can build specific software for us? Do we build versus buy? There's just like so many kind of business strategy parts of it. And then from the entrepreneurial side, there's yet another layer of that. So, if you think about just the business and security, like CISO is kind of the top of that, right? You're responsible for a budget. You need to go figure out what to spend money on. But then the entrepreneurial side is a whole nother piece of it where it's like, we have customers, they're trying to figure out how to effectively spend their money. How can we build something that's really good for them, that's going to help them? And then also all of the business stuff with that. So how can we hire a great team to do it? How can we message it effectively? How can we build sales that are capable of explaining this well? All that kind of stuff. So I think the longer I go, the less interested in technical I am, and the more interested I am in like these kind of meaty business problems.
And it seems like the business problems often are going to be related to kind of an attempt to defend against a perceived risk or threat, and those are constantly changing. So how does like information sharing work within businesses to figure out how to allocate resources? Because I think you mentioned, if Pepsi has $100 million budget, they might decide that they're going to, build stuff, buy stuff, hire stronger teams, hire bigger teams. But how do you sort of think about, this sort of the unknown unknowns in the world as complex as it is, and a new thing comes up that sort of reshapes this next week? Like, how does information sharing work across the industry? Is everybody pretty collaborative, or do people kind of form little kind of groups, kind of cross company, or maybe across the industry groups that help them prosecute these and figure out these types of allocation decisions?
Yeah, that's my favorite part about security. It's kind of an underdog mindset. The attackers have such a asymmetric advantage versus us that security teams are extremely collaborative. So I'm in a whole bunch of security community Slacks where people will share very transparently like what problems they're facing, what attacks they're seeing, and things like that. So, if you're in product management, you're not really collaborating with, let's say you're at Facebook, you're not collaborating with product managers at Google or Apple. You all are competitive, but security teams at Apple, Google, and Facebook will absolutely collaborate and share techniques, because it's like, this isn't secret sauce to the business. If we are all more effective at security, we're going to win. So there's a lot of great groups that will share like very transparently, like very sensitive information to help everybody else not fall victim to the same attack that they did.
Right. And if you're at one of these large companies, I guess you must have, a bunch of like PR risk if something really bad happens. And so do they form like very formalized, structured, like legal agreements around who reports what and how those get discussed? Or is it more just an honor code between them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So for the cross company organizational like information sharing, it's basically Chatham House rules, and security community is very tight. So if you screw somebody, if you say like, yeah, I will keep what you tell me sensitive, like secret, and then you screw somebody, the industry is very small and everybody's going to find out that happened and then not trust you anymore. So I've seen people being very open to sharing this information. Now, when you're talking about like disclosure and breach and whatever, like, anytime something like that happens, legal's in there, everything locks up, it's sensitive and privileged. So when there's even the hint that something really bad happens, PR's in there, legal's in there, and everything gets much tighter. But I think the kind of like day to day is where you get this like really good transparency.
Right. And when companies kind of, you're operating within a company, kind of managing security risks, are you like at Netflix or Databricks or other places that have you been sort of actively deciding build versus buy, and how does sort of the build versus buy decision work within large orgs?
Yeah, so that is one of my favorite strategy points. Is like, okay, we have this problem. Here's a solution over here. It does 80% of what we need. Does it make sense for us to use this and accept the 20% that it doesn't do, or should we build our own? And there's a lot of different dimensions to this. So there's what makes the most sense for the business. Like it could mean like 80% is a good enough solution, and we should take our smaller investment here, give this vendor some cash so we don't have to manage it, and then go and solve other problems. Or it could be like, it's critical for us to get this 100% right. So this vendor solution with its 20% that it doesn't do that we need is actually really important, and we need to build it. But then there's all kinds of like next level calculation on top of that. So now you build it and you have to maintain it. Things evolve. You need to keep it up to date. People leave the company. So then, when new people come in, they need to get ramped up on this thing. The other aspect of this is, and this is kind of, a lot of people don't talk about this, but there's, for the engineer or the leader that's considering building something, oftentimes the incentives aren't aligned with the business. So if you think about what engineers want to do, they want to jump in and solve meaty problems. A lot of times an engineer will say, hey, like I can build this thing. They'll highlight the 20% that it doesn't do. It's like, oh, this is really important to us, because they want to build it. Because if they build it, it's fun, and they'll get recognized. They're like, hey, they built this thing. You can go do the conference talk and talk about your work. You get promoted, you get more money, all this good stuff happens. But really, if you think about somebody that's aligned to what the business needs and they take themselves out of it, then oftentimes buying something is the right solution. So I always recommend, and the way I've always thought about it is, if there's something that is business specific, we want to be spending as much of our time on that as possible. So like an example of this, early on at Netflix, I built an open source project called Security Monkey. Security Monkey is one of the first cloud security posture management solutions. So it'll go and scan, it'll build an inventory of all of your cloud assets. It'll tell you about misconfiguration. The reason that they built that is because there wasn't cloud security posture management at that time. But then 5 years later, the industry caught up. There's all kinds of cloud security posture management. These things are far ahead of where Netflix could have ever built. So at that point, they said, okay, like industry caught up. We actually prefer to buy something now and go work on business specific problems. So I think that's the right way to think about it, is like, let's say that there's something related to like how our at Netflix consumer streaming data is managed. That's maybe a more business specific problem than I want to know about cloud misconfiguration. So we'd always prefer to spend our time on that, all things being equal, but sometimes the market's just not there.
Right. So I guess that kind of strategy idea, kind of the build versus buy, may be some of what was on your mind when deciding to start Resourcely, because you had seen what it takes to build and you'd sort of assessed what the market would be likely to buy. And I wonder, I think there was actually a gap, because some of your initial learnings from what you built, I think, was some of the Netflix stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So we, take that Lemur case, and then that became very successful. And then we thought, okay, instead of this dashboard, that we have like Security Monkey telling us about problems that we have to go Jira and track people down, wouldn't it be much better if developers were just able to create infrastructure with good practices baked into it? We didn't have to go fix it. And so where this started was our team, security, were experts in some cloud infrastructure. So we would go and provision those for developers. Developers would come and ask us, they're like, I want an S3 bucket, I want an IAM role. We'd set it up for them, because then you don't have it misconfigured. We had sister teams like databases. Database team would do that for databases and Elasticsearch clusters. And another sister team would do that for networking things. So we all were on call and provisioning infrastructure. And the reason we did this is because we didn't want to deal with misconfiguration. And then we got tired of being on call. We got tired of the ops. So we built these self-service systems. There isn't great self-service today. So when I got to Databricks and I saw a lot of the problems that I was going to have to solve were going to involve building more of these paved road for self-service, that's when I thought, okay, I think there's an opportunity here. Like anytime I see a problem where it's like all companies have relatively the same thing. They want cloud infrastructure. They don't want it to be misconfigured. There's like 10% differences in an organization, but 90% of it's the same. Good cloud infrastructure is good cloud infrastructure with small deviations in between. So I got really excited because I think there's a good opportunity here. And then I started talking to people, my friends at places that could afford to build things had started building it. But some companies, they need this and they just don't have the resources to go and build it. And, going back to my build versus buy, they shouldn't. It's not specific to their business. This is relatively commodity cloud infrastructure problem. So this is exactly the kind of thing that, in my opinion, if there's a good one from a vendor that will go and maintain it for you and keep up with the cloud, this is the kind of thing you should be buying.
Right. And how do you think about like that transition? Because you had gone from internal at Netflix and working on kind of the build internal, and then you were as close with the rest of the community of people who were also building similar projects. And if I recall looking at your timeline, you were like a few years of like Databricks and some angel investing, and you kind of, it was this kind of idea gestating in your mind, and kind of were you sort of poking at it and figuring it out during that, I guess, like exploration process before you actually pulled the trigger to start the company?
I think subconsciously the answer is yes, but in my conscious mind, the way this worked was in 2017, we were responsible for a few pieces of cloud infrastructure, and S3 buckets were one of those. At the same time, we had Spinnaker, which is really nice self-service that developers were using to go to and deploy applications. And I actually asked the Spinnaker team, like, hey, would you consider adding S3 buckets to Spinnaker? I think that you already have this really nice portal, can do self-service stuff. We're on call for these S3 buckets. We'll do the integration. Can we just put S3 buckets into Spinnaker? It didn't make sense for them. They wanted it to be strongly focused on applications. So I said, okay. And I put my head down and we built self-service. But I think in the back of my mind, I really liked the business problems back then. And at the same time, I realized, despite living in Silicon Valley, I didn't know anything about startups. I didn't know, who VCs are or what they do or anything like that. So that's where I started initially advising. I wanted to stay at Netflix. I wanted to have that experience of working with a great team with resources, but I also wanted to learn about how startups work. So I just went on a quest to learn as much of this as possible. I would go and ask friends like, hey, do you know any VCs? Can I talk to VCs? And just kind of started that way. VCs introduced me to some companies that could use help. I started advising them. Those founders introduced me to other VCs. The VCs introduced me to other companies. It kind of just spiraled from there. And so, I got to learn a lot about startups. And consciously, it was just, I think this is fun. Subconsciously, looking back, I can see now that this was like, okay, I think maybe there's a company in the works somewhere. And I want to start learning about how this stuff works.
Right. And as you started to learn about startups, were there certain things that, coming from some larger companies, were there certain things that you were just like flabbergasted, totally surprised, thought was crazy about how these startups operated? Or was it kind of already, you had a little bit of a mental model for it and just didn't have as many surprises as you thought?
Definitely a mental model, because it's, going back to the strategy thing. The fun part about security is like you have X dollars and do the best that you can with that. So if you, I don't know what the number was at Netflix. Let's say it's like $50 million for a security team. If you say, okay, I'm in a startup now, the startup has 25 people and they are just getting their first security person. So, maybe the number there is like $2 million or $1 million. So what do I do with $1 million? It always kind of made sense to me that it's going to be different priorities. So in that mindset, you're going to start by shoring up some things that we'd solved a long time ago at Netflix. Like I need to get some kind of, central identity with SSO. I need to roll out MFA. I need to have some kind of vulnerability management process. I need to have some kind of basic, here's how we're going to handle incidents. So actually one of the things that I did along the way that was really fun is I called it zero security hire. Basically I'd go and meet founders. They'd say, we're interested in a security team. We don't know where to start. And I would actually talk with them, understand the business, help them understand what first security person should they hire. Actually do the interview, because they're founders with some other background. They don't have a security background. It's really hard to know if a security person is good or not. So I'd actually help them with interviews, and then I'd stay on to mentor. So that was a really fun way for me to get exposure to what is life like at a smaller company that doesn't have a Netflix budget.
And was it then obvious when it was time to actually start Resourcely? Did you already have some of the customers maybe from those relationships or other kind of small community of security people? Was it easy to figure out the first customers, or did you sort of have to pound the pavement a lot and find new relationships that you didn't already have?
I started off with at least the conversations with people that I know. So what I always tell people in the beginning of a company, the idea is to really figure out exactly what it is you're going to be doing. So when I raised money, I had a vision, which is like, we want self-service because this in paved roads, this is going to help developers prevent misconfiguration and make their lives easier. But the exact product that we have was a ton of iteration. So it's like you go and talk to 50 people and you learn little tidbits and you string those together. And then you use that to create, what I call Figma and dreams, right? It's like, here's a kind of a lightweight like Figma that explains how the product might work. And, here's what it could do. Then you retool your pitch to explain that. And then you go talk to 50 more people and you learn a bunch of new stuff. So that kind of like iteration, exactly where the product is going to be, I think is most important. If, when you're very early and you don't have anything to sell, if you're reaching out of the blue, it's hard to get someone to spend time with you and like, hey, listen to my wild ideas about a startup and give me feedback. But if you already know somebody, you're like, hey, I'm trying to start something. I really need your input and feedback on this. I think people will be generous with their time. So yeah, I'd always recommend that, go through relationships if you have them, not with the goal that you're going to convert them to customers. In the beginning, you don't have anything to sell them, but really just you want somebody that'll spend time with you and give you input. Is this a good idea? Is there something really close to it that you can add that's good? Things like that.
Right. So it almost sounds a little bit like kind of customer development or figuring out what you should build, even though you're sort of capable of doing the building yourself. You didn't start by building something and showing what you built as much as you kind of sat down in a room or a Zoom and had a call or a discussion about what would it look like if we did X, Y, or Z. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. So one thing that I recommend to founders, this is something I did. So I think people always, when they're nervous, they retreat to their area of comfort. And I have a technical background. So I knew from the beginning, talking to customers is scary. They might tell me my baby's ugly. Like that sucks. So what I did is I set a rule for myself that I will not write any product code. Like I can't hide behind technical. I can either, call it quits for the day and like not do anything useful, or I can go out there and reach out to people and talk to customers and go do that. So I set that limitation for myself. I think that's critical. A lot of times, I'll talk to founders, they're thinking about doing a company. The first thing that they want to do is they want to build a proof of concept. Like in most cases, I don't think that makes sense. Like if you go to meet investors, they're going to want to know this is de-risked as much as possible. So you building a proof of concept didn't give you any new information. Like there was never any question that you could actually build this solution. The risk is that people don't care about this. Like you've built something that people don't want, or it's not urgent for them, or, it's kind of a little problem. They'll pay a little bit of money. So I think what I tell founders is you should spend your time doing that validation as much as possible, because that's going to remove the most risk for your time invested.
And I think as an angel investor and advisor, you've seen a lot of these companies very early. Do they usually come to you with that mindset, or do you sort of coach them into like, hey guys, come on, stop building this thing. Let's talk to customers instead? Or what's sort of the state when people show up on your front door?
Kind of a mix. I think a lot of times a founding team will have somebody with kind of business sense. I think the most easy, clear cut is you have somebody that's technical, that's lived and breathed a problem, and you have a really good business-minded founder that is just already ramped up on going and talking to a bunch of customers. I had no sales background ever. I never sold anything when I started the company. You can definitely learn to do it if you're open-minded and you're willing to take input from good people around. But yeah, I would say, I don't know, maybe 60% of the time when I talk to founders, you're like, we think we're going to do this business. Next step for us is we're going to build a proof of concept. And then I suggest like, maybe don't do that. Spend that same time instead and go and talk to people. Because if you build something, chances are when you do the customer development, you're going to learn something that makes it so you have to kind of throw away what you built anyway. So it's always, in my opinion, better in the beginning to spend the majority of your effort just going and talking to as many people as possible. So then when you're ready to build, you know exactly what it should look like.
Right. Now, I think on LinkedIn, I saw you were a self-described extrovert. And I would guess that most of the security community may be a little bit more introverted or a little bit more cautious about public speaking and gathering people and kind of the way you are. I wonder, is that somewhat of a learned skill or something that you sort of developed for yourself, or is that something that you kind of grew up with?
Yeah, I put extrovert a while ago. I've actually revisited that. So I think that I'm actually an introvert that can turn it on when needed. And the reason I know that is I went to RSA earlier this year and I worked a booth for 2 days. And it just, by the end of the day, like I was just completely drained. It turns out that talking to a bunch of random people actually removes energy from me versus gives it to me. What I did was I forced myself, I realized that communicating ideas effectively was going to be critical, especially as I moved less technical and more business. And so I forced myself early on with some conference talks. The first time I did it, I was super nervous. I was just like had all of this nervous energy and had fear about going up and speaking to people is definitely a learned skill. Like the more that you do it, the less nervous that you get. And you can 100% teach yourself to do this. It's interesting too, because I find that in a one-on-one conversation, I actually get a lot of energy from those things, but in kind of like big random group settings, I lose energy. So I think the extrovert introvert dimension is a little less clear than maybe I put it on LinkedIn. I should update that at some point.
Well, I also noticed that I think was it about 9 months ago, you started a podcast called 404 Security Not Found. So that may play to your kind of one-on-one or kind of extrovert introvert tendencies. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's going?
Yeah. So, I mean, the point of 404, transparently, my goal is to have people think about Resourcely constantly. So if you think about like, why does Pepsi do Super Bowl commercials? It's not because they expect people to run out and go buy Pepsi when they see the commercial. It's because when you want somebody to understand your brand, you just need to get them continuously. So I want to put out something that's good content that has Resourcely's name attached to it today. And then I want to do it again next week. And I want to do it the week after that. And maybe 4 weeks from now, you're like, oh, I've seen Resourcely a lot. I wonder about them. And then you see it again in a couple of weeks and you're like, oh, I want to go learn about Resourcely. And you go check out our site. And then 2 weeks from now, I go and reach out to you and I'm like, hey, I'd love your feedback on Resourcely, whatever. If you've seen me a bunch of times and it's not just some random thing out of the blue, you're more likely to take the meeting with an open mind. So this is actually like something that I recommend to founders a lot is go put out something good, something that people want to consume. In the case of 404, I have really good friends, Leaf, Anna, and Will, and they are security leaders with a whole bunch of experience that I like to learn from. So the point of 404 was to hang out with them, maybe especially people that are getting started in their career or people that are currently in jobs that like to hear other perspectives. It's really for them. But then it's published under the Resourcely site. So this is kind of one of the extensions of content comes out that hopefully people like to consume that has Resourcely's name attached to it. This is all lightweight brand building stuff. There's all kinds of different ways to do this, but I think the common thread is if you think about a technical founder that wants to go heads down and build their product, on top of that, if people don't know about your product, then you're not going to be successful. So you have to find some way to get the word out and get people to know about your company.
All right. So it seems like you're able to sort of channel your energy to do more, public speaking at RSA and being kind of a podcast host as ways to sort of get the word out and sort of be more public. I wonder sort of with your kind of founding team, because I think it's you plus, is it one co-founder?
Yep. Yeah, Len.
And how did that kind of pairing come together? Do you guys sort of bring different strengths to the business, or how did you decide to work together?
Yeah. So 2017, I had this idea and I put my head down and we built self-service, got to Databricks, realized that we were going to need self-service again. And then I thought, oh crap, I think there's an opportunity here. And I think that I have the right background to build it. I want a co-founder. So I think that, founder is a hard job. Going at it alone is tough. You should find a co-founder or co-founders that complement your skill set well. And where both of you or, all of you together combined have the necessary skills and you have coverage and you have somebody in the trenches with you that you can bounce ideas with. So I wanted a co-founder. Aladdin, I had managed at Netflix. He was one of the star performers on my team. And I knew about Aladdin that he was really passionate about doing the stuff and growing in the areas that I didn't want to. So for the company, I wanted to focus on business stuff. I wanted to learn sales. I wanted to go out and talk to a bunch of customers. Aladdin wants to run a great engineering team. He wants to learn, to be a VP of engineering and a CTO and like really have this good technical and build a great engineering team and run everything together well. So his interests and my interests are separate and they don't overlap, but together we have good coverage. I trusted him a lot. So one of the things that takes out early stage companies is this kind of like umbrella category of founder drama. Like founders don't get along. They find out they don't get along at the exact wrong time. And I thought the risk of that was very low with Aladdin. He's highly ethical. He's got a great attitude. We already know each other very well and can give each other very direct feedback, which I think is critical. And yeah, most importantly, the things that I want to do for the company and he wants to do and the things that I want to grow into and he wants to grow into are separate. And together we form this complete piece.
All right. That's great. And then when you're starting to build out the team around you and Aladdin, did that happen from pretty early on? Did you start sort of recruiting and building some of the early team, or did you guys make a bunch of progress before you started getting more, capital and people resources together?
So there's definitely different ways to do this. I will say we were in a fortunate position in the sense that we had funding lined up from basically the day that we left our jobs. A lot of founders aren't in that position, so they have to leave their jobs and then build something and get enough progress that they can go and raise capital. So from day one, Aladdin was focused on starting to build this great engineering team that we knew we were going to need. And I was focused on doing the customer discovery and talking to as many folks as possible. So it was kind of just this good team. So from day one, we basically had capital lined up and we knew that we were going to be able to hire the engineers that we needed. Other founders can be in a different position where it's like, okay, we're going to start with just us. Our costs are low. We'll get a certain amount of validation and then we'll go and raise capital from there. So I think there's not a one size fits all solution here. What we did works for us, but if you're in a different position where you're going to have to quit and have 6 months of personal runway and then go and find out if it's a viable business, then you do something else.
Right. And how did that early capital raising process work? Because you mentioned that sort of, I think even maybe years before, you'd already been developing relationships within the venture ecosystem as you were sort of meeting new companies and trying to help. Was it Security Zero, that kind of like advisory practice that you were helping?
Yeah.
So was that, was it some of those sets of relationships that were some of your early funders, or how did you kind of go about raising capital initially?
What I've learned, this was not obvious to me 5 years ago, is that great VCs have this kind of like sixth sense for who's going to become a founder, and they will proactively build relationships with you years in advance. So what I tell founders today is, they're at their company, they're like, we think we may want to do a business. I tell them they have a blinking red light above their head that they can't see, but VCs can. So great VCs will build those relationships ahead of time. And so in my case, I was fortunate in that I did a relatively small number of VC pitches, and those were all relationships that I already knew. I didn't have to reach out cold. One thing that I'll tell founders is VCs are like normal people. So if they discover you, then they feel like they're onto something. If you need to reach out to a VC through cold email, that's least desirable. The best would be if you can get, friends to do an intro for you or something. You want basically like people to go to great investors and tell them that you're good, versus like you having to do, like anything, right? Like my product, I'd much rather somebody tells their friend, hey, Resourcely's awesome, check this out, versus I have to do a cold email outreach.
Yep. It's always good to get other people talking about you.
Yep, exactly.
And was the early recruiting, was it other people you'd worked with before or people that you had in your network who heard you were getting a team together?
Unfortunately, in our case, Aladdin and I have a great security network. So in terms of customer conversations, we have this big list of folks that we can speak with. But most of the engineers, which is what we need early on, we just need great software engineers and builders. The ones that Aladdin and I really knew well were at Netflix or Databricks or Robinhood. And what I've learned is that the kind of people that join an early stage startup and are great engineers at early stage are not great engineers at later stage companies. They're just a different mindset. If you think about a Netflix engineer, they're making $500,000 a year in cash, risk-free, and, working with great people and building really cool stuff. This is different than a startup mindset. So startup people are really interested in wearing all the hats and building something from the ground up. So most of the great engineers that Aladdin and I knew were at these big companies and weren't a good fit for a startup. So we had to kind of start from scratch. And we have a hiring principle. This is something we borrowed from Netflix, but basically it's extremely important for us to have A players, the people that are just, the top of the top. And those people that also are good in a startup environment, those are unicorns. It takes a long time to find them, especially if you don't know them already. So yeah, it was and still is a very long hiring process for us. Some companies, hit the ground running and they have a team of 10 engineers in 3 months. We've taken a long time to find the engineers that we have.
What generally makes, you mentioned sort of like the characteristics of a great Netflix engineer being maybe different than what you'd need in a startup, startup environment, like wearing lots of hats. Do you look for people who have more breadth within like a technical stack, or do you look for people who have maybe product or sales minded areas where they can contribute, or what does it mean really to be kind of a startup engineer in this context?
I think the most important part, in addition to being a great engineer, is that have you heard about the settlers, pioneers, and town planners paradigm?
I don't think so.
Okay. So the idea here is that there's different kinds of engineers. Some are pioneers. They want to go from 0 to 1. They want to invent something new. And then by the time it gets to the proof of concept stage, they're not as interested in it. Then you have settlers, and settlers like to go from 1 to 100. So they take that proof of concept and then they build the initial product around it. And then you have the town planners, and town planners like to take something from 100 and make it a commodity. Like it works. It's like the water. You turn it on and it's there and you don't think about it. In a big company, you need all of those. You need all three. But what you need a lot is town planners. You already have something that's working well, and you need to make it just reliable so it blends into the background and you don't spend time on it. With the second most being settlers, and in new companies, a lot of times there's not a ton of pioneer work. At a startup, it's kind of the opposite. Like everything by definition is, you're just creating it from the ground up. And so the kind of people that want to make something a commodity may not be happy in a startup. So I'll give, my engineer something, and then I'm like, okay, this is good. It works enough that we can demo it and get validation from our customers. Now I need you to go do this other thing. A town planner would be very frustrated with that. They're like, what are you talking about? It's not even close to done. Like we can't move off of it now. It doesn't do these things. So I think that mindset is really important. The kind of person that just understands that the business demands that we kind of like do things far enough to get early feedback, and then we go do something else. So that's kind of the biggest thing. In Netflix, you might have somebody that's an expert in something. They've been working on this project for 2 years. We don't have anything in the company that's been going for 2 years. So, and nobody has stayed on the same project the whole time they've been here. So it's just a kind of a different mindset and what people are happy with.
Do you think that town planners could be effective pioneers if they wanted to? And is there like a mindset shift? Because presumably there's like a lot of talent that could be applied if sort of the mindset were right. Is that something that you think if somebody has the desire, they can make that transition, or is it just sort of too much baggage for a startup to sort of be sort of involved in that?
I think anybody can discipline themselves into whatever they want, but I also believe that life is short and people should be really, working is a third of your waking hours during the week, right? And if you're spending your time doing stuff that doesn't fulfill you, you can do that for a while, but in the long run, I think that everyone should be doing the kind of work that they strongly enjoy. And the good news is that with all these companies, you need all of them at some stage. So yeah, I think great engineers can for a while do one of the other modes that they don't like, but the best fit is when you get these like really, really creative, brilliant people that are just like, this is my stage. I love this stage.
Mm-hmm. And then if they start with you, do you expect that they would grow into one of those other things, or they would get refocused at some point in the future on a new pioneer-like initiative within the larger Resourcely company? If you fast forward 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and Resourcely is a much larger org, do you think that those people would be likely to grow up into kind of maybe a town planner at some point, or would they kind of keep redeploying to the frontier of what's possible?
So I don't exactly know, but what I can model here is from what I saw at Databricks. So when I joined Databricks, it was 2021. The company had been around for 8 years. Some of those people had grown up from being a founding engineer. So they, 8 years in, my former boss started off as one of the first software engineers hired. And by the time I got there, he was a VP of engineering. So you can definitely like grow up and get new skill sets in a company that's growing. One of the things I believe is that when you get great people, you need to keep them happy. And what that means is different to every person. So you need to understand like what motivates somebody. So I always talk to the people that work at my company about what do they want to do as the company grows so that we can align them to those opportunities. One of my engineers is really good and wants to become management at some point. I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity for that. There's always going to be new projects and initiatives. A lot of the people that join my company want to be founders someday. So I fully expect that some of these folks are going to be here for a few years and then they're going to go start their own companies. And I would be thrilled for them. Like, I think that, like I said, life's too short. Everyone should do work that really motivates them. I hope that everybody that's at my company today stays for a long time, but I also wouldn't want to ever get in the way of somebody meeting their dreams. And I think a lot of the people that we have now are going to go start their own companies at some point.
Yeah, I think it's actually a strong intuition, strong kind of pattern to both be able to attract people who are entrepreneurial enough that they probably will leave to start something at some point, but then also to figure out how to almost become, almost a side effect of the company being successful is it also becomes this kind of boot camp or sort of startup founder academy in a way, sort of a training ground. And I wonder if somebody were to come to you today and they say, look, I wanted to do my own thing and didn't figure out what I would work on. Can I come here? And is there a way that I can both contribute to the Resourcely mission, but you can also help me solve for some of the new skills that maybe didn't work out in my previous attempt at creating something, so that maybe a couple of years from now I can go out and do something new on my own?
Yeah, we don't have any people that have been founders before, but we have a lot of people that are interested in being founders. Yeah, this is definitely one of those. I actually like top talent can go to many places and has a lot of opportunities. So you need to do something to win. We try to do everything we can to win. So we give good compensation. But one of the things I do is I'll explicitly, like if somebody mentions they want to be a founder, I'll tell them, like, one thing that I do that's very different is I'm extremely transparent about what's going on in the business. How it's going with the investor conversations, what the strategy is there, how it's going with customers, what I'm doing to learn about customer discovery and all of that kind of stuff. So one of the value props that I say is, like, if you come here and you want to start your own company, you're going to learn more here in this role than you will at any other opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And when I think about sort of other things that people might be on people's mind when they're joining a company is, I know every investor who considers investing in a company is interested to think about, what is the market size here? Or, if everything goes right, like, what kind of role could this play in the future? And sort of how big of a market and how much kind of revenue and market cap could this company achieve? And I think, like, probably some early employees or team members would think about that. Maybe some of them aren't as focused on it. But I think for the people who do want to think about that and understand, like, if everything goes right, how big could this be? How do you sort of articulate that for the Resourcely business?
Yeah. So what I did is I created a sheet, and the sheet has, compensation, and then it has models. So basically, like, okay, we go this many years and we raise this many rounds, and each round dilutes us this amount, and you have this equity, and then here's what it becomes, post dilution at various exit outcomes. And so people can kind of like visually see that. But then the other thing I do is, especially for folks that are interested, I do regular one-on-ones with everyone at the company, and this is their time. So they can ask me first anything that they're wondering about the business or what I'm doing or whatever. So I'll sometimes share what I'm seeing. And this could be through, angel things that I've done. It could be what I'm hearing from other founders. I'll share it anonymized, but I think that I'm in a position where I get a lot of information that my engineers or other folks at the company don't have access to, and I can teach them. So yeah, I'll share a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm also very transparent in the sense that, like, I'll tell people, hey, I don't know if this is going to be a huge outcome or not, but what I can tell you is that you're going to learn a ton in this role no matter what, and nobody can take that from you. I think the business is promising. I think that we're in a great market and we have a great team, and with those two things, anything is possible. But no matter what, you're going to learn a ton here, and that's going to help you in anything else that you go do after this.
Yeah, I think that kind of learning and being able to work with great people is probably the best kind of criteria for a talented engineer or an operator to select a startup. But I wonder, like, when people are thinking about what is the potential kind of impact that Resourcely could have on the world, do we think about it as something of what is cloud security and what is the market for that? Or like, what if everything goes right here, and I'm not talking just purely like market cap, but like, what role does it play? Does it look something like a cloud provider, like an AWS, or does it sort of look more like a traditional, kind of security company, but with a different maybe business model or kind of delivery model? Or how should we think about like what this becomes?
Yeah. So the best way that I'm thinking about it is, I think this becomes like Okta. Like, Okta didn't invent SSO, but they created, the really nice gold standard for an SSO integration at a company. And that enabled people to channel all of these systems behind something better than username and password. I think that opportunity exists here. What I see it today is that a lot of companies take largely reactive stance to cloud security, which means that they're doing this Jira and chasing people down. And I think that it's just not effective. Whenever you're in vuln management, you're playing catch up, and this does lead to actual breaches. There's 60% of breaches involve some vulnerability you probably already had a ticket for. So I think that this doesn't work, even if we completely fail monetarily, but we go and spawn some other company that goes and becomes Okta. I'll consider that a win. Like, this is the way that, in my opinion, it's so powerful. I saw this firsthand at Netflix. I think other companies need this, and they're just not thinking this way right now. So I think, long term, if I look forward to like 5 or 10 years, paved road is just going to be this major pillar of security that every company invests in. And I think that we have the opportunity to really pave the way for that and change security teams' minds that like, no, creating Jira tickets isn't good enough.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have deep conviction that the market will move this way, and hopefully Resourcely is the one that moves it there. But maybe part of the story here is regardless whether Resourcely or somebody else, it's going to happen. And so if you're learning the skills and learning kind of how this business works and the tools and technology around it, whether it's via Resourcely or the next one, everybody reassembles. But like the skills and knowledge and talent that you take with you is going to be valuable in your career, kind of regardless if you like the problem space. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that the security products of 5 years from now don't look like security products of today. I think when we look back, we're going to see, security integrates into Jira and creates Jira tickets for devs as like a stop on the way to real DevOps. Real DevOps is being tightly integrated into the process that engineers are doing things and making security something they don't even have to think about. It just happens for free.
Mm-hmm. And when you start talking about things happening for free or things you don't think about, it's hard to avoid kind of the ML discussion here. So I wonder, I think it's actually a positive pattern that Resourcely doesn't pitch itself as an AI company, but presumably with some of the, you're focused on your customers, you're focused on selling kind of a solution that works for them and solves a need today. But with all of the kind of modern changes in, new models that are emerging, large language stuff, is there anything from that world that looks interesting for how you might improve kind of or extend the impact of the Resourcely products?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, I think like everyone, I'm thinking a lot about AI. And when GPT 3.5 came out, I remember exactly where I was. I was at reInvent in Vegas, and all of a sudden, security Twitter was on fire. Like everybody was like, wow, look at all of this stuff it can do. And since then, I've been paying extremely close attention to this. I think any founder that's not paying close attention to exactly what AI and LLMs can do is missing a big part of their job. When GPT-4 came out, I basically dropped everything for a week and just did an extremely deep dive. I kind of put the impact that AI has on companies into 4 buckets. First bucket is AI screwed you. Your product did something that is now trivial with LLMs, and LLMs can do them way better. Bucket 2 is AI made you. So, all of the like picks and shovels company for AI are in this bucket. Maybe your product didn't need to exist, and now because of AI being the hotness, it's a major category. Number 3 is AI is going to vastly accelerate your development. I think most software companies are in this bucket. You're not going to replace all of your developers with AI. It doesn't work that way. What you are going to do is you're going to take your existing developer and they're going to be a lot more effective. Like they're not going to have to spend time on this kind of like boilerplate, low hanging fruit. It's like a junior engineer co-pilot for you. And then number 4 is AI is going to basically make something that was really hard in your product to do, like much, much simpler than it was before. So actually, I think that Resourcely is mainly in that bucket. So if you think, our product has blueprints. Blueprints are a good practice for developers to use. One of the issues is that you need to be like pretty familiar with cloud to even know what cloud infrastructure you want. And so we create these blueprints. Blueprints are, a good S3 bucket or a database or whatever. These are all configurable by teams. But for an engineer, it's like, here's what I'm trying to get done in the cloud. Go and set up the infrastructure that I need. I think LLMs are going to be extremely good router of like piecing together the Resourcely components to create whatever it is devs need. So that's where I'm most interested. We're also in bucket 3. Like there's a lot of things that AI is quite good at that will help our product be delivered much, much quicker and better than it is. But I'm most interested in that number 4, where it's like developers don't even think about blueprints. They're just like, this is what I'm trying to get done. The LLM goes and selects a bunch of blueprints. Developers fill in some basic stuff, and then you're off to the races.
And is that the kind of stuff you would likely do with kind of off-the-shelf components or APIs that depend on other people's kind of models? Or is that stuff you think you would end up training custom models to sort of maybe understand blueprints better or kind of understand the architecture that underlies what people are trying to achieve? Is it more custom ML stuff or more off-the-shelf ML stuff in your mind?
In the beginning, it's going to be off-the-shelf stuff just because, as a startup, we have to be extremely deliberate with where we're spending our time. I've played with GPT-4 like everybody. I think it's actually quite good at what I just mentioned. So in the beginning, I would just integrate OpenAI. You'd have this nice like text box like, hey, what are you trying to do today? And it would go and integrate with the Resourcely product and select all of the stuff for you that you need. I think in the long run, where people go to like their custom stuff is if GPT-4 doesn't have, or GPT-6 or whatever we're on by then doesn't have good enough domain experience with your problem. From what I've seen, the natural language selection works quite well. So I don't think we're going to need to move off for that reason. The other reason is like it's too slow or it's too expensive. I think for our specific product, it doesn't seem to be either of those. Like this isn't something that you're doing all the time. A reasonable context window GPT-4 query isn't that expensive, and it's gotten way faster. So my guess is that we're a pretty far long way off from having to train our own models. Where I do think we might end up training our own models is in actually like blueprint creation. So if you're like, hey, like I actually like just want this new pattern, we're going to have a catalog of these things. So Pepsi is going to be able to select from this big catalog of other things that other companies have done, but you always are going to need some kind of like bespoke stuff. So if you're a security team and you're like, oh, and here's this new pattern that AWS came out with, I want to make this available. I think blueprint, like the 90% correct blueprint authoring with then somebody to go and review and tweak it, it'll be quite good at that. So that might be the kind of thing where a specific model makes sense. But yeah, I think from what I've seen for our product, we're not in like the at scale line of fire. You're not going to be doing millions of these things. So GPT-4 is really good and doesn't need the domain expertise specific to our product to go and do this well.
Makes sense. And kind of if we can get back a little bit to some of the team stuff, I wanted to just hear a little more about like, what does the Resourcely team look like today? Are you guys, how many people are you? What are sort of the roles and responsibilities? Are you remote or in person? How does sort of the day-to-day cadence work?
Yeah. So we are remote US, and this is actually something I'm really proud of. So at Netflix in 2020, we'd been, this traditional like in the office culture. And then 2020 happened and everybody had to go home. And I was a manager, and I was a relatively new manager. And I thought like, okay, crap. Well, I need to still manage my team well. Like, how can we become great at remote work? So I went on this study tour, and I went and learned from companies like GitLab and Zapier that had written publicly about how they do really good remote work. And so I actually created some internal guidance, collaborated with another Netflix leader to create internal guidance for Netflix on how to do this well. Then fast forward to, we're trying to build this company of great talent. If you think about somebody that's really good engineer, can thrive in a startup environment, like these are already unicorns. I don't want to add, and they live in the Bay Area to the requirements list, because now this is an extremely small population. And I have to compete with the other great companies for these like very, very finite talent. So what we flexed on is we don't care about in the Bay Area. We're going to become great at remote work. We're going to open this up. So our team is distributed all over the place. I have an engineer in Florida that's really good, has a family, not going to move out here. We have an engineer in Chicago, really good, has a family, not going to move out here. So we flexed on that. And, I'll be honest, like we definitely lose some stuff. Like periodically we'll get the team together and we'll get in a room, and the ground that we can cover in that format is so much greater than we can do in remote. But you know what? I wouldn't have these people if it wasn't for the remote thing. So this is a deliberate trade-off, and it's something that we're doing on purpose. And I think it makes sense for us. Now, what this means is it's much harder for a junior engineer to come and be successful. So I already kind of have this bias a little bit from Netflix. Netflix famously didn't hire junior engineers. Kind of like 5 years of experience is sort of the minimum. So far, we're doing that too. I think it's really hard for somebody that's just starting off in their career to ramp into something, that's a new space for them, and it's a new career and they're remote. This can be pretty hard. So we'll need to figure that out at some point. I believe that companies need to have a healthy balance of junior and senior people. But for the moment, I would say it's working really well. It's actually been a big advantage to us is being flexible to great talent that's not here.
In fully remote, but US, you said, right? So do you think that over time, like I think you mentioned like GitLab and Zapier, I think are each pretty global. Would you expand to being kind of more global over time from a remote work style? Or do you think that there's something special about kind of the time zone overlap or the way you communicate?
This is something that Alana and I go back and forth on a lot. And, so far we've been, let's not do this on hard mode. Let's have at least people like time zone aligned. The reason for this is, in a remote work practice, you want to have a lot of collaboration happen asynchronously. So you put your ideas in a doc, you'll do like doc comments or whatever. But in kind of like, hey, we just need to like figure this out. You still need meetings for that. Like if you go back and forth more than like 5 times on a thread, it's meeting time. And then if you need to have a bunch of stakeholders and those people are all over the world, it becomes impossible to find a meeting time that works for everybody. So far we've been, hey, let's not throw in like time zone problems and do this on hard mode. That being said, one of the things that we did, we brought on this company called Good Code. Good Code is a really good kind of like security focused front end contracting company run by a friend of mine named Austin. Austin paired us with this engineer that's really good from Ukraine, and it's worked fine. Like I wouldn't have been open to hiring a Ukraine engineer, but Austin hired one and has had this person paired with us for months, and it's been really effective. So I would say that I'm more and more open to it with time. That said, we already have a Canadian engineer, so that's not adding the time zone mix in there. But it's not that we care about folks in the U.S. It's that we so far didn't want to screw with time zones. I would guess as we continue to develop, we're going to be more and more open to really good talent, no matter where they are, and we'll just need to have kind of a core working hours to make sure that we can collaborate when needed.
And how does collaboration work? Do you have any kind of guidelines on what should be written or what deserves a meeting, or how you collaborate on Slack or do stand-ups? Anything around sort of the culture, cadence of communication?
Yeah. So I think what we recommend for anything that's reasonably big, if it's quick back and forth, go ahead and sync up on Slack. If it's any kind of reasonable size proposal, you should write a design doc for it or an RFC. And then you should go and specifically tag the people whose feedback that you need. If you're just here's a doc, everyone read it. When you have no specific call to action, then nobody's going to read it. So what you need to do is you need to figure out who are the actual stakeholders that I need. We borrowed something from Netflix. We call it the informed captain model. So informed captain means, if you think about some companies are top down, right? Decisions get made at the leadership level. At Netflix and at our company, we want the decision to be made as close to the person familiar with the problem as possible. So most decisions, we have informed captains that are engineers that own the problem. They're not responsible for knowing all the right answers. They're responsible for facilitating a good discussion and making a decision. So we don't vote. It's not a democracy about decisions. The informed captain makes a decision. It's their job to get the right stakeholders involved. So they'll write an RFC. They'll go and say, I need, your input, your input, your input. Those people will read the doc, comments, whatever. And then usually it's a meeting to go and make, unless it's just a clear cut decision, it's a meeting to go and discuss all of those things and then come to a resolution. And then the resolution should be documented in the RFC so that everybody knows what it was, what the discussion was, why we made this decision. The other thing about informed captain too, there's a couple other pieces that we borrowed. So disagree and commit. I think this is an Amazon thing. Basically, all likelihood, somebody's going to disagree with the decision that an informed captain makes for anything reasonably complex. Their job is to present, keep bringing information to the table until all the information's out, and then recognize that maybe the informed captain made a decision they don't agree with. At the point that a decision was made, their job is to get in line. They don't do, 6 months from now, oh, I told you that was stupid. They do I'm going to put 100% of my weight behind it. And then the informed captain's job is to continuously be open to new input. Maybe their idea was the right one at the time, but you've learned something new. It's not I made this decision, I'm going to go down on this hill. Your job is to continuously, stay on top of that decision. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think that there's good asynchronous and synchronous tools for that.
And are you pretty explicit about that informed captain kind of culture? And do you revisit it, I don't know, weekly or monthly so that everybody kind of understands that that's how decisions get made?
Yeah. So, Alana and I were at Netflix together. This is pretty clear to us, but nobody else at the company was at Netflix before. So it's kind of a teaching thing as new people come. What I try to do is if I see, back and forth on something, I'll try to remind people about the process for it. And then I also try to call out when people have done it well or give feedback privately when it's oh, okay, remember we have this thing. And I think people pick it up pretty quickly. It's empowering for people. A lot of people have been at these top-down companies where despite being an expert in something, they don't make decisions. I think people really like it. It gives them a sense of ownership, which kind of pushes everyone to be better, more on top of their game. Right.
So it seems like there's a lot of things from your Netflix experience that you reference as positives that you bring in to Resourcely. I wonder if there was anything kind of in the Netflix process or kind of the way the company operated that you disagreed with and that you actually want to reinvent or take sort of a different stance on with Resourcely.
I really do like a lot of stuff from Netflix. I can't think of anything specific that I disagree with, but I'll say it's not a universally good thing. It's a trade-off sort of thing. So for example, with the, one of the things about Netflix is, we hire A players and they say, we're a sports team, we're not a family. That means that, hiring is not perfect. You're 100% going to make mistakes in hiring. And if you are committed to A players, you need to fire those people. And, that doesn't make people feel good. And it can definitely create kind of apprehension. Netflix will say flat out when you come, hey, look, this is the culture. If you're not comfortable with it, this isn't a good fit for you. I try to be good about that too, as being explicit. Resourcely is going to be awesome for you as long as you are the best at your job. And if you're not the best at your job, then you're not going to be here anymore. We are an early stage company. We've been operating a little bit more than a year, and we've already had a few people that didn't work out. I think firing people doesn't feel good, but it's absolutely critical for this. And some people are going to be like, you know what, this is too much pressure. I don't like this. I want to go work somewhere else. I absolutely think that those people should. I don't want to misrepresent what we are. We are like a really fun, exhilarating place for people that want to learn and do their best work. But yeah, you have to be on your A game at all times.
And what does the actual team size or composition look like today? How many people work at Resourcely?
We're 9. So we have 2 founders, 1 product ops, and everybody else in engineering.
And do those engineering roles kind of all cover different areas within? Like, are you doing kind of customer deployments and kind of new product development, or how do sort of the teams break down?
We have a front end engineer, and that person, is the informed captain on front end. But really within that, everybody else is a back end engineer. I do have informed captains on areas of the product. For example, Preston, one of our engineers, is the informed captain of guardrails. David is one of our engineers. He owns our runtime, which is, basically like the evaluation of the Resourcely language and going and doing all of the stuff in the product. Patrick is another engineer. He owns the back end. So within that, there's a bunch of back end engineers, but they have specific areas of ownership. Those things can change over time. As we grow, it may change. But yeah, I think that clear ownership is pretty important. But that being said, we're changing all the time. So something may come on Monday that we planned, and then I may get some customer requirement. We might need to adjust the plan. So I think all of the thing in common is all of the engineers are good with doing whatever needs to be done and is most critical for the business right now.
Right. And as you think kind of to the future, are you currently looking to add team members, or do you think that you will be, 3 months, 6 months out, or how do you think about sort of the next phase of team growth within Resourcely?
We have 1 backend engineer role open, and then after that, we're going to be done until Series A. I think at Series A, we'll need more engineering. We'll need some sales folks. We'll need a technical marketing person. We'll need, some of the engineers are going to have to be customer success engineers and things like that. But yeah, we're pretty much done until Series A. I don't have a crystal ball when that'll be, but I would guess it's not going to be a horribly long time.
What are the kinds of characteristics that would make you sure that you're ready for Series A? Is it kind of a certain number of customers, certain amount of revenue, certain sort of market visibility or traction? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So when I started the company, my first goal was to prove to myself that this is worth spending time on. I had this idea, and it was an idea in my head and Aladdin's head. It's I think that the world needs to go here, but I didn't have any customer validation. I knew that it worked for us at Netflix. I knew that other friends had been building these kinds of things at companies that could afford to. But, number one goal is this something, do we have a business here? And I discovered back in December, through enough customer conversations, oh yeah, this is good. There's definitely something here. So the next phase is proving to the world that we have something here. And what I'd like to get to is, for Series A, I think is we have great customers that are paying us, significant amount of money compared to the value that we're giving them. So, we're doing real deals with real companies, and we have a good pipeline of future deals to do. I think at that point we'll be, it's enough validation where it's okay, yeah, this is working. It's time to, throw more VC fuel on this fire and accelerate things. So I think we're getting pretty close to that.
How do you think about what's necessary to go from maybe early customer development, proof of concept, to really starting to close big money deals? Is that like a sales process, or just like a product maturity, or sort of what kinds of factors do you think kind of make that switch flip?
Yeah. So we've had some design partners, back from the time when we were doing Figma and Dreams. These are folks that are yeah, I'm excited about solving this problem. I think that what you're telling me makes a lot of sense. And for a design partner, they pay a token amount of money, and they meet with us regularly. So as we build the product, they can give us feedback. Now, at this stage, we have a functional product working. It doesn't do the stuff it will do, when it's GA and just ready to scale up, but it does a lot of valuable stuff. So at this point now, I brought on a sales advisor that's really good. That's basically coming to customer meetings with me, helping to do all of the qualification, discussing the buying process, things that as an engineer, I just don't think about. So yeah, now it's about, these are not repeatable sales motion. These are all specific deals, but it's definitely time to get somebody that's good at sales involved in the process. And yeah, fortunately, I've got somebody awesome that has joined us and comes to all of the important customer meetings with me.
That's great. And I know we're running toward the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you some other kind of personal life questions before we wrap. But before that, I wanted to check, is there anything about Resourcely that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you were reminded of that we should let people know about?
No, nothing specific. This is a good discussion. I really had a lot of fun with this. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, me too. Well, I noticed that you, I know I'm always kind of teasing you on Twitter about your air bike, but I know that you have a lot of pictures of your home gym. And I wonder if you could tell a little bit about your kind of fitness story or fitness journey.
My life's not going to be complete until you come and do a workout on that air bike. Yeah. So in 2019, I was skinny fat, basically like looked slender, but I had no muscle definition. And there was a thing called HIT School that it's a really cool program. HIT School changed my life. Basically, what they would do is I was still in the Netflix office. They would roll up with this truck full of like dumbbells and battle ropes and all of this cool equipment, and they would put everyone through like HIT style workouts where you kind of went with partners and rotated through a bunch of stuff. So that taught me the basics of lifting. And in the beginning, it sucked. Like these are like brutal workouts. Like just getting through these things was awful. But I noticed at the end, like when the workout was over, that I had this like endorphin rush. And I was like, wow, that actually feels good, And then went forward a few months and I would start to anticipate the endorphin rush. I'm like, oh, this is going to suck, but it's going to feel great. And then at some point it stopped sucking. And that's when I knew like, okay, weightlifting is just a part of my life forever. Then 2020, COVID happened and my beloved HIT School in the truck, like nobody was going to the office. There's no truck. I was like, oh crap. So HIT School moved online. You'd join a Google Meet and, people were doing like dumbbell lifts with like paint cans and all kinds of weird stuff. Of course, like I was not the only person thinking this way, but I was like, I need some workout equipment, as did everybody. And factories were shut down. So a lot of the manufacturing, like the pipelines were cut. It was really hard to get stuff. So, and I moved into a new house. The new house has a 2-car garage. And I was like, okay, this is going to be my gym spot. I started buying just whatever I could get my hands on. So, I need some kind of flooring. I got these like crappy puzzle mats on Amazon. Oh, I need dumbbells. I paid like, I think $3 a pound, which is egregious, but it's what I could get. And I started doing workouts in my garage with the idea like, hey, this is just a stopgap until I can get back to something like HIT School. And then I got to love the convenience of it. Instead of having to like get up and go drive to a thing and do the truck and whatever, it's like I can roll out of bed, have some pre-workout, and I'm moving. So I think, especially like it's really important for people to remove friction from this process as much as possible. So for me, I could just get going and be working out. And then I was like, okay, this is it. This is like permanent. I'm not going to go back and do workouts anywhere else. I'm going to do this in my garage forever. And I was like, okay, this is going to be nice. So I just started buying all kinds of strength equipment. One thing that I did that I would recommend that others don't do, like I think you should do validation in the beginning, but I bought basically like cheap everything. And I've ended up having to replace all of this stuff. Like part of it was just like, that's what I could get in COVID. But if somebody thinks that they want to build a garage gym, just get like nice stuff, the nicest stuff that you can afford up front. Then you don't have to rotate it. Today, this is like tightly integrated in my life. I found out in 2018 when I started managing people that I have ADHD. And for me, it's critical to do this exercise to make my brain function well. So in addition to the endorphin rush, it helps me focus. And I do not skip this. I do this 6 days a week with one rest day. When I travel, I do it. I'll pick hotels that have a gym that's reasonable. What I use now instead of HIT School, in HIT School, they got rid of my 5 a.m. class, which is the only time I can work out with kids. So I got this thing called Future, which is a fitness app where you get a coach that programs workouts for you. I love it. I'm so happy I discovered this. Like I said, in 2018, this wasn't a part of my life, and now I couldn't imagine living without it.
And do you have like goals? It sounds like initially you kind of just wanted to go from skinny fat and then you sort of got the endorphin rush and that kind of kept you hooked. Do you have goals around like what you may hope to achieve or how you decide if you're kind of on a path that you're excited about? Is it a bit of a journey with kind of some goals or milestones that you think about a lot?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer. I always like to have like something that I'm striving for, like quantifiable progress. The cool part about fitness is like you can always get more fit. And usually like over time, one thing that I'd recommend to people is if they're on this journey, take regular pictures because in the moment, it's really hard to see progress. But if you look like month to month, you can see visible progress, which is really cool. But in addition to that, I've set quantifiable targets. So there's something called the 1,000-pound club in powerlifting. That means between bench press, deadlift, and squat, you can do 1,000 pounds. So my goal is to do that at 12% body fat. I have a long way to go. I think my deadlift right now is like 320. My squat is like 260 and my bench is like 190. So I have couple hundred more pounds to add, and I'm probably around 14.5% body fat. So more fat to lose, more strength to gain. But like, this is all for fun. I'm not getting paid for this stuff. I think it's cool to keep me motivated. But the best part is the way that I feel awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think staying fit helps with your, sort of all your brain function, helps you be better at your job and better at your life. So I'm a big fan of fitness for a long time too. So I can't wait to get my chance to try out the air bike sometime.
Yeah, the air bike's got your name on it.
All right, Travis. Well, thanks so much for spending the time. It's fun to hang.
It was really fun. Thank you.